And so look with me in Proverbs chapter 18, and we're going to touch on a couple scriptures this morning. I think Pete may put them up on the screen, I'm not sure. But Proverbs 18 is where we touched on last time. We'll go forward a little bit there, Pete, to verse 20. It says, "A man's stomach will be satisfied from the fruit of his mouth, and from the produce of his lips shall he be filled." And so how many of you know God created the world? How? He spoke it into existence. And I want you to understand something. Your world, your life, is a byproduct of the words that you speak. How many of you have ever worked around somebody like I have that says stuff like this? If it can happen, if anything bad can happen, it'll happen to me. Anybody worked around somebody like that? Maybe you're like that. If anything bad can happen, it'll happen to me. Listen, and you know what? It does. And so one of the things that we need to understand is that we are eating the fruit of our own words, whether we like it or not. Bad words produce bad fruit. Good words will produce good fruit. And it works the same way within relationships. And so how many of you know, if somebody comes to you for marriage counseling or advice, or let's just say you're just your friend. Your friend's like, yeah, you know, my wife, she cussed me out really good, and boy, it just helped so much. It doesn't, does it? Bad words produce bad fruit. Say that with me. Bad words produce bad fruit. Because Jesus talked a lot about words being seeds and soil being our souls, our hearts. And so bad words produce a bad harvest. Good words will produce a good harvest. And so we eat the fruit of our own lips. We eat the fruit of the words that we speak. And so in a very real sense, God has imbued us with the authority to create our world with our lips. This is why it's so critical. We're going to spend next month, and our theme for the month of March is going to be victory in parenting. Because how many of you know we grow up, we get born into a family, but there's no requirement to learn how to parent. Almost every family, it's like reinventing the wheel every time because we come from a broken family that never learned how to parent, and so we're starting another broken family that doesn't learn how to parent. We don't learn how to talk to our kids, how to build our children with our words. And so it's so vital that we learn this so that we don't perpetuate an environment and a society that's broken, busted, and disgusted. And continues to get divorced and hurt people over and over and over. Okay? Because how many of you know hurting people hurt people? That's just the way it works. Most of us carry wounds from our past that wounded us, and they're wounds that you can't see. I'm a retired soldier, and one of the things that people have finally come to realize is that all the wounds that people have aren't visible. There are a lot of people that come home with PTSD. They come home with scars and wounds from the things that they've seen, the things they've been required to do, and your mind isn't wired to process this stuff. Yeah, I remember I was going through an exercise when I was in my military intelligence school, and one of the guys that I was working with, we're sitting beside each other, he had been blown up in a tank with IED 3 separate times. Or no, it was Humvees. And so the early IEDs, they would blow up and usually it'd throw the Humvee up in the air a little bit and back down. Well, the Iranians got involved with making IEDs, and they started making what they call electronically formed penetrating IEDs that were throw a molten ball of copper, and it'll shoot it right through a Humvee. And so these guys saw horrible things that you can't explain. And just talking to him, he would get choked up because the effect on him was so real. Though, you know, somebody can punch you in the nose and you can get over that much quicker than you can seeing something or hearing something that scars you so terribly. My son was a helicopter pilot in the Army, and he deployed to Afghanistan. The things that he saw and even smells will remind him of things. And so we were coming up Interstate 81 one time, and he was telling me some stories, and He flies fixed wing aircraft for the Army now, and then he's in the reserves, and then he flies 737s for United Airlines for his regular job. And so he's flown helicopters, turboprop aircraft, and now he flies jets. And he was telling me one of the first times he got called out to do what they called a med chase, where he had to go pick up a person. Her brother had dumped gasoline on her. This is an Afghani child, and torched her. And he was trying to tell me about this, and all of a sudden, the story stopped. I was driving up the highway, and all of a sudden, he stopped talking. And I look over, and tears started coming. And he couldn't talk. Now, this is 5 years later. And so certain smells will remind you of these things. Certain tastes, certain things you hear. And so we had things like this that we grew up with. I can remember my father and my grandfather and others saying things that were wounding. And honestly, in our marriages, we don't understand how to speak and how to disagree in an agreeable manner. We don't have to say things that are intended to hurt. There's a way to disagree, and there's a way to argue in a way that is not vicious. And I'm telling you, before we get in an argument and in a disagreement, we better check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, because once you say something, you can't get it back. And so once the wound is there, how do you unwound it? Right?